On 17th April 2019, for the first time in the country's history, presidential, parliamentary, and regional elections were held in Indonesia on the same day. With more than 192 million eligible voters, 6 million election workers deployed to oversee, more than 810,000 polling stations, and 245,000 candidates running for more than 20,000 national and local legislative seats, Indonesia is the third largest democracy of the world. Many describe this election as the world's most complicated single-day election. Indonesia is regarded as Southeast Asia's most successful democracy and a role model for others. Being a multi-party democracy, a total of 27 political parties contested the election, but there were no communist parties among them. Indonesia has an official ban on communist parties, barring them from contesting the elections. But 50 years back, communism was thriving in Indonesia. With a membership of about 3 million by 1965, the Communist Party of Indonesia, abbreviated as PKI, was the strongest communist party outside China and the Soviet Union. Then how did the Communist Party of Indonesia vanish? After the end of Dutch rule on Indonesia in 1949, the 1950 Constitution of Indonesia mandated a parliamentary system of government. The first years of parliamentary democracy proved to be very unstable for Indonesia. Cabinets fell in rapid succession due to the sharp differences between the various political parties within the newly appointed parliament. There were severe disagreements on future path of Indonesian state between nationalists who wanted a secular state, the Islamists who wanted an Islamic state, and the communists who wanted a communist state. In 1955 parliamentary elections, the Indonesian National Party of Sukarno topped the poll. Sukarno was the leader of the Indonesian struggle for independence from the Dutch Empire. The election results showed equal support for the Masumi Party led by Islamists and PKI led by communists. By 1956, Sukarno was openly criticizing Western-style parliamentary democracy, stating that it was based upon inherent conflict which ran counter to Indonesian notions of harmony as being the natural state of human relationship. Instead, he sought a system based on the traditional village system of discussion and consensus under the guidance of village elders, and proposed a cabinet representing all the political parties of importance and named this system as guided democracy. He proposed a threefold blend of nationalism, religion, and communism into a cooperative NASCOM government to appease the three main factions in Indonesian politics: the army, Islamic groups, and the communists. Concerns were growing among Islamists and the army about Sukarno's support for PKI and PKI's rise in influence and militance. PKI's assertive efforts to speed up land reform frightened those who controlled the land and threatened the social position of Muslim clerics. Sukarno increased engagements with the People's Republic of China and the Soviet Union. He said at a non-aligned movement summit meeting in Cairo in October 1964 that his current purpose was to drive all of Indonesian politics to the left and thereby to neutralize the reactionary elements in the army that could be dangerous for the revolution in Indonesia. On the evening of 30 September 1965, members of an armed group calling itself the 30 September Movement kidnapped and killed 6 of the most senior army generals. The movement proclaimed itself as Sukarno's protectors and said it was necessary to prevent a possible coup by the anti-Sukarno pro-Western military generals. The army under the leadership of Major General Suharto moved quickly to crush the movement. The army blamed the 30 September incident on the PKI and began an Indonesia-wide anti-communist propaganda campaign. It quickly shut down communist and other leftist publications, and pro-army papers began to dominate the media. These army newspapers began to circulate graphic images and descriptions of the murdered, tortured, and even castrated generals in order to convince Indonesians that the murders of army generals were a PKI attempt to undermine the Indonesian government under President Sukarno. The Indonesian army slowly gained influence as Sukarno went, and within days the government was under the control of General Suharto. Even though 12 people were killed in the 30 September movement, Suharto portrayed it as a nationwide conspiracy to commit mass murder. Millions of people associated with the PKI, even illiterate peasants from remote villages, were portrayed as murderers. The army removed top civilian and military leaders it thought sympathetic to the PKI. Soon, the army began an anti-communist purge. The army directed the killings with varying degrees of assistance from religious groups and other enemies of the PKI. They targeted members of the PKI and its affiliated organizations, military men sympathetic to the PKI, and Sukarno supporters. The army played a key role in recruiting, arming, and training militia units to carry out the killings. Estimates of the number of people who got killed range from 500,000 to 2 million people. This event is referred to as the Indonesian mass killings or the Indonesian Communist Purge of 1965 to 66. Now the real question is, what role did the US play in this massacre? The Indonesian mass killings of 1965 to 66 occurred against the backdrop of the Cold War. The ideological, geopolitical and economic rivalry between capitalist US and communist USSR was at its peak during this time. Victory of communists in China, North Korea and Cuba had frightened the US. US was extremely worried about the spread of communism around the world. US formulated the containment policy to contain the spread of communism over newly born independent nations and to bring those nations under the influence of capitalism. Along with its containment policy, it also adopted the rollback strategy. Under its rollback strategy, US engaged in changing ruling communist regimes of various countries and putting a regime who favors US in place of it. US intelligence agency CIA provided logistical and financial support to opposition groups who were against communist regimes in their respective countries. As PKI grew in popularity and influence, and Sukarno strengthened alliances with communist countries and employed an anti-American rhetoric in 1964, US wanted regime change in Indonesia. Thus, it provided the Indonesian army with logistical and financial support to overthrow Sukarno from power and eliminate the communists. On 17 October 2017, the non-profit National Security Archive along with the National Declassification Center published a batch of US diplomatic cables covering that dark period. While the newly declassified documents further illustrated the horror of Indonesia's 1965 mass murder, they also confirmed that US authorities backed Suharto's purge. Perhaps even more striking, as the documents show, US officials knew most of its victims were entirely innocent. In 1965, when General Suharto blamed the 30 September incident on PKI, the CIA supplied communications equipment to help him spread his anti-communist propaganda campaign. USA also provided targeted names of thousands of alleged PKI leaders to the Indonesian army. US encouraged the killings by both providing funds to anti-communist forces and supplying the Indonesian army with the names of people whom it believed were PKI members. Great Britain and Australia, along with US, also played active role in spreading anti-communist propaganda campaign during the killings, which included radio broadcasts being transmitted into the country that repeated Indonesian army propaganda as part of a psychological warfare campaign designed to encourage support for the killings and to discredit the PKI. Western media also did its bit to justify and glorify the mass killings. Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt commented in the New York Times, with 500,000 to 1 million communist sympathizers knocked up, I think it is safe to assume a reorientation has taken place. Time magazine described the suppression of the PKI as the West's best news for years in Asia and praised Suharto's regime as scrupulously constitutional. A headline in US News and World Report read, "Indonesia, hope where there was once none." A BBC reporter, Robert Charley, wrote it was a triumph for Western propaganda. A New York Times journalist wrote an article titled "When a Nation Runs Amok," explaining that the killings were hardly surprising since they occurred in violent Asia where life is cheap. If you like this video, then hit the like button. Drop in your comments below if you want me to make more such videos on how US anti-communist wars took millions of lives in Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos. Subscribe to Very Well Informed and press the bell icon to keep yourself very well informed.